All right, as soon as they emerge from that meeting, we will take you there live to listen to what the Canadian contingent has to say about how it went. It still hasn't wrapped, though. We're going on just over 90 minutes at this time. So to discuss what might come of it and sort of what the stakes were heading into that meeting, I'm here with the front bench. Mohammed Ali is a Liberal strategist and vice president at Crestview Strategy. Jeff Rutledge is a Conservative strategist and vice president at Macmillan Vantage. Communications and government relations strategist George Soule was the former director of communications for the federal NDP. And next to him, that's Stephanie Levitz. She's a senior reporter in the Globe and Mail's Parliament Hill Bureau. Hi, everybody. It's nice to see you. So, Steph, I'll start with you. We thought this meeting was going to be done about half an hour ago. There was actually a press conference at the embassy. So they thought the federal ministers thought they were going to get to the embassy and be able to have a press conference by 5:30. What does it say to you that they're still holed up in there?
It says that either they're tangled in a web they can't extract themselves from, which is to say, you know, the U.S. government is taking one step, we're taking another step, and nobody can seem to come up with something, some communique, for lack of a better word, that they're going to agree upon a readout here, what actually happened in this meeting. Because these meetings are funny, right? These diplomatic meetings, often the conclusion is set before they even take place, and it's a matter of shaking hands, signing some dots on a paper. With this administration, that's never a certainty, and you can go in thinking you're arguing over one thing and discover what you're actually arguing over is something else entirely.
What about the mix around the table? So normally we have like federal ministers, George, meeting with members of the administration or, you know, other levels meeting with, like this is Doug Ford, Ontario's premier, with those ministers. It happened because Doug Ford put a surcharge on electricity heading to the States. Then Donald Trump says, I'm doubling aluminum and steel. Then he backs off. Howard Lutnick calls, says, we'll have a meeting. He backs up. Like, it was wild. What does that tell you about, again, that they're still meeting?
Well, yeah, I think, you know, there's nothing normal ever with dealing with this administration, which is kind of
fair.
You know, it just is the way it is. And I think, you know, Doug Ford just ran an election campaign on the premise that he needed a mandate in order to do whatever needed to be done to negotiate with Donald Trump. And so that's what he did. And I think, you know, seeing this mix of people, I think, again, it just doesn't matter. It's whoever Donald Trump will allow into a room and listen to our message, I think has to happen, because there's no reasoning with this guy. I mean, in some ways, we're just kind of standing on a pier yelling at a tsunami, hoping we don't get wet. Like, Donald Trump's going to do what he's going to do until somebody can figure out a way to get through to him. And apparently he likes the strongman attitude that Doug Ford took. So if that's what it takes and Doug Ford can give him a hat and we can all move forward, then great, and congratulations to him. But it is going to be a challenge to try to figure out what the exact path is to get through to this guy.
Yeah, it feels almost impossible to, because even if you get through to Howard Lutnick in this meeting, which I could be proven wrong in a few moments, but I feel like the fact it's going longer rather than just 5 minutes in and out is maybe not a bad sign. But even if you convince Mohammed, Howard Lutnick of something, ultimately he even says right after all these things, you know, he'll come out on media and say, well, it's Donald Trump's going to make the call.
Yeah, I mean, look, Donald Trump is the sole decision maker. He gets random advice at the last minute, and he makes a decision, which, you know, again, to Stephanie's point, like he says one thing and nothing comes out of his mouth. So I think Lutnick is an important voice because he is, I think, probably the secretary that's bought the Kool-Aid the most.
That's a good point, yeah.
Versus the others who are still like trying to play it.
Like Rubio looks so uncomfortable.
Exactly.
Lutnick looks like he's right in there.
Right.
Yeah.
And so Trump is like, okay, this is a guy who actually gets how I think. And if he says something like, look, Canada's trying to be helpful, then maybe he takes a little bit of like, okay, Canada's trying to be helpful. So the fact that the meeting is going long, I think, is good because there's a lot to talk about. Like, if this was a 20-minute meeting, I'd be worried. Like,
yeah, like I feel like, who knows? But ultimately, if it were shorter, I'd be more nervous.
Yeah, and so is there something else coming out that they're being told and like trying to negotiate that? Like, it's very unclear, but also...
I hadn't even thought of that, Mohammed. Oh, God.
But I think, you know, if there's an olive branch here that can be extended on both sides, I think that probably, and I hope, is being discussed, and that Lutnick can bring something back to Trump saying, look, these guys are serious, they're trying to give us something, cooler heads are trying to prevail, I think they'll meet us somewhere, so maybe we can avoid further tariffs. Now, that could change 48 hours.
Right. But I do think the one thing I would say for the Canadian contingent, Jeff, and I'd love your perspective on this, is there did seem to be like a consensus view among the two federal ministers who are there and Ford ultimately yesterday, right? After all the back and forth and everything where everyone was like, we want to de-escalate this. We want to try and be productive, even if it feels impossible. Like, they did seem to be on the same page, despite the fact that they are different, you know, represent different parts of the political spectrum. Like, there was some consensus going into this meeting. It felt like, at least.
Well, I think the fact that all three of them kind of blew past media and said we'll talk to you on their side is actually a very clear indication of that. I think they're playing it smartly from that perspective, and perhaps I'm a bit of an optimist on this side that they're going into this with an expectation that this is a substantive discussion where real negotiations can happen at the table. And I do think we have a robust economic case to make to Lutnick here, and I'm hoping that that's what's extending this meeting, is that they're getting into the nitty-gritty of what those numbers look like and are able to refute some of the claims from President Trump around what he believes to be a trade deficit. Our countries are so intertwined, and I'm not sure that the president completely understands how that functions. But I do have some, again, optimism that this meeting is going long because they're able to get into those details and hopefully able to shift the discussion from this trade deficit to a relationship of both of us getting something out of it. So.
It's interesting stuff, and if you're just joining us now, we're waiting for that meeting to break in D.C. We'll take you there live as soon as it does. I think we do have a live shot once again of those doors, where it's now been, an hour and 40 minutes since the meeting just began, or since the meeting began, I should say. I think the idea of taxing the electricity for whatever, you can have a big debate about it, but whether it should have happened or not, it somehow did get the attention, though, of people in the States. And it was interesting today, and full credit to everyone listening on the radio program I do, because Donald Trump went off on the White House again about his artificial line, and I don't need anything from Canada. And a lot of listeners wrote in, well, if you don't need anything, then why'd you get upset about messing with electricity or threatening to block it? Like, there are some weaknesses, you could say, in the argument that Trump is trying to put forward.
And what makes that so interesting is we just spent, and I don't know the figure, the tip of my fingers, but how many billions of dollars on new border enforcements and trying to crack down and do things at the border because we thought that was going to be the thing. If only we this, if only we that. And what it actually took was Doug Ford whacking him over the head with a hammer and saying, no, I refuse. Right? And I find that really interesting. But does that set us up for some kind of longer-term strategic play where every time they threaten one thing, we threaten something bigger? We only have so many bigger things we can threaten. And electricity was a big one. I mean, plunging them into the dark was big, but you can only do that one time, I think, before either you've got to do it for good no matter what, or it becomes a less effective bargaining chip.
Well, and then beyond that, it becomes other stuff that we could block, which is a bit more politically fraught in this country when it comes to what different provinces think.